In 2019, a team led by geneticist David Reich at Harvard Medical School screened 61 skeletal samples from Rakhigarhi, the largest city of the Indus Valley Civilization, spread across 550 hectares in what is now Haryana, India. 60 samples failed. The hot, humid climate of South Asia had destroyed almost all usable genetic material. But one skeleton, a woman buried among dozens of ceramic bowls and vases sometime between 2800 and 2300 BC, contained a faint trace of ancient DNA. The team sequenced it over 100 times to extract a usable genome, and what they found contradicted almost everything historians believed about one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. Think about that for a moment. One skeleton, one woman, one chance to decode the genetic origins of a civilization that once stretched from the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas. The DNA inside her bones would blow apart decades of accepted science. But before we get to what that genome revealed, you need to understand what was hiding in plain sight for nearly a century. Because the civilization this woman belonged to was not some minor settlement. It was the largest urban society of the ancient world, and almost nobody talks about it. While Egypt built the pyramids and Mesopotamia raised ziggurats, a third civilization quietly surpassed both of them. Picture a city the size of Manhattan, built 4,000 years before Rome. The Indus Valley Civilization spanned more than 1,500 kilometers, encompassing over 1,000 cities and settlements, and supporting between 4 and 6 million people at its peak, between 2600 BC and 1900 BC. Its 5 major urban centers, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, and Gunwariwala, were engineering marvels unlike anything else in the ancient world. Mohenjo-Daro alone had more than 700 wells and a grid-patterned street system with main avenues precisely 30 feet wide. How many cities today can claim that kind of precision from 4,000 years ago? But here is the detail that should stop you in your tracks. This civilization built the world's first urban sanitation system, underground sewers constructed with precisely laid bricks, drains running from every house connected to covered public channels, settling pools for filtering debris, and flush toilets connected to cesspits through clay pipes. Their drainage infrastructure was more sophisticated than anything found in contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia, and arguably more efficient than many systems in Pakistan and India today. And yet, unlike the pharaohs and the kings of Sumer, the Harappans built no monumental temples, no palaces, no towering statues of rulers. There is no conclusive evidence of armies, priests, or a ruling class. The largest structures may have been grain storage facilities. Let that sink in. A civilization larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, with engineering that surpassed both, and it invested in infrastructure, not ego. How does a society like that simply vanish from historical memory so completely that the modern world did not even know it existed until 1921? For decades, the textbook answer to who the Harappans were seemed straightforward. Farming, the story went, spread from the Fertile Crescent eastward across the Iranian plateau and into South Asia, carried by migrating farmer populations. Modern genetic studies appeared to back this up. Iranian-related ancestry was the single biggest contributor to modern South Asian DNA. The assumption was clear. The people of the Indus Valley descended from those migrating Western farmers. And because modern South Asians also carry significant steppe pastoralist DNA, the same genetic signature found across Europe, many historians assume this ancestry was present in the Harappan population too. But nobody had ever tested those assumptions directly. Nobody had ever extracted DNA from a Harappan skeleton. So what happens when you finally do? And that is precisely where this story takes a turn nobody expected. Extracting ancient DNA from the lowlands of South Asia was considered nearly impossible. The subtropical climate destroys genetic material at rates that make most samples worthless. But a breakthrough changed everything. In 2015, geneticist Ron Pinhasi published a landmark study in PLOS1 showing that the petrous bone, a tiny pyramid-shaped structure deep inside the human skull that protects the inner ear, preserves DNA up to 100 times better than any other bone in the body. David Reich himself later described this discovery as the catalyst that opened the floodgates of ancient genomics. His team applied this technique to those 61 skeletal samples from Rakhigarhi. 60 failed, but one, individual I6113, most likely a woman, contained enough degraded DNA that after more than 100 sequencing attempts, they pieced together a genome. Reich called it the most intensive effort his lab had ever made to recover DNA from a single sample. So what was hidden inside those ancient bones, and what that genome revealed was a bombshell. The results, published in the journal Cell in September 2019, stunned the field. The Rakhigarhi woman's genome showed zero detectable ancestry from steppe pastoralists. None. And critically, her Iranian-related ancestry did not come from Iranian farmers. It came from a lineage that split from Iranian plateau populations more than 12,000 years ago, thousands of years before farming was even invented in that region. Think about what that means. This was not the DNA of people who received agriculture through migration from the West. This was the DNA of an independent population who may have developed farming on their own or adopted agricultural ideas from neighbors without any large-scale population movement. If you have ever wondered why the origin story of one of the world's oldest civilizations matters, here is your answer. The textbooks had it backwards. Her genome matched 11 genetic outliers previously found at sites in Iran and Turkmenistan. Individuals who stood out because their DNA did not match anyone else buried around them. Those outliers were almost certainly Harappan migrants living abroad. Together, these 12 genomes form what researchers call the IVC cline, a genetic gradient representing the ancestral signature of the entire Indus Valley Civilization. A companion study published simultaneously in the journal Science analyzed 523 ancient genomes from across Central and South Asia, the largest ancient DNA study ever conducted at that time. And the combined picture was revolutionary. The IVC population was the single largest ancestral source for modern South Asians. David Reich stated it directly. Ancestry like that found in the I5C individual is the primary ancestry source in South Asia today, and the implications reach even further than origins. They reshape one of the most politically charged debates in all of South Asian history. After the civilization's decline, the Harappan population split. One branch mixed with people from peninsular India, forming what geneticists call the ancestral South Indians, whose closest living descendants are found in southern India today. Another branch mixed with steppe pastoralists who migrated southward through Central Asia after 2000 BC, forming the ancestral North Indians. That steppe ancestry matches genetic profiles from Bronze Age Eastern Europe, tracking a movement of people that also spread the Indo-European languages. But this steppe DNA arrived a full 1,000 years after the Harappan civilization was at its peak. 1,000 years. That is the distance between us and the Viking Age. The Harappans themselves had none of it. So if the people who built this civilization were not Western migrants and not steppe herders, who exactly were they? The DNA now tells us they were their own people, rooted in South Asia for thousands of years before any of these migrations began. The DNA suggests that Indo-European languages arrived in South Asia from the steppe via Central Asia in the first half of the second millennium BC, after the Indus Valley Civilization had already begun its long decline. But what caused that decline? The answer lay hidden in climate data that scientists only pieced together in 2025. A study published in November 2025 in Communications, Earth and Environment by researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, reconstructed climate patterns across the Indus region spanning 2,000 years. They identified 4 extended drought periods between 4,450 and 3,400 years ago. Each drought lasted more than 85 years, each one affected between 65 and 91% of the entire IVC territory. The droughts coincided with the global 4.2 kiloyear event, the same climatic catastrophe that collapsed the Old Kingdom of Egypt and the Akkadian Empire of Mesopotamia. Temperatures rose by roughly half a degree Celsius, and annual rainfall dropped by 10 to 20%. To put that in perspective, the same climatic event brought down 2 other great civilizations on opposite sides of the ancient world, and the Harappans were caught right in the middle of it. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, which had sustained dozens of Harappan settlements, depended on the monsoon. As the monsoon weakened, rivers retreated. Imagine depending on a river that your grandparents told you had always flowed, and watching it shrink year after year, decade after decade, with no end in sight. One drought, lasting 113 years, between roughly 3,531 and 3,418 years ago, aligns directly with archaeological evidence of mass urbanization. The civilization did not collapse suddenly from invasion or war. It faded under the weight of centuries of relentless climate pressure, its people migrating eastward toward the Gangetic Plain in search of water. And yet, despite these breakthroughs, the Rakhigarhi genome remains just one individual. Nick Patterson, a co-author of both the Cell and Science studies, cautioned that the Indus Valley Civilization was almost certainly genetically extremely diverse, a cosmopolitan society where multiple cultural groups lived together across massive urban centers spanning 1,500 kilometers. Additional genomes, he said, will surely enrich the picture. Meanwhile, the Indus script, hundreds of symbols found on seals and tablets across dozens of sites, remains completely undeciphered. No Rosetta Stone exists for the Harappans. What stories are locked inside those symbols that we may never be able to read? And the fundamental question still hangs in the air. How did a civilization larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, with engineering that surpassed both, manage to vanish so completely from historical memory that the modern world did not even know it existed until 1921? For nearly a century, the Indus Valley Civilization was explained through the lens of other civilizations, its agriculture imported from the West, its languages brought by steppe invaders, its collapse a footnote to greater histories. But DNA does not follow textbooks, and what the genomes reveal is a civilization that was indigenous, innovative, and genetically unique, a people who built the world's most advanced urban infrastructure, likely developed farming independently, and whose genetic legacy runs through over 1 billion people alive today. If you are among them, think about what that means. The story of the Harappans is not ancient history, it is your history. The Harappans were not who we were told they were, and when the full genetic picture finally emerges from those ancient bones, it may reshape everything we think we know about the origins of South Asian civilization. But the Indus Valley is not the only ancient society whose DNA is rewriting history. There is another discovery, hidden deep beneath the Amazon, that is even more staggering. History is never finished.